In every era and in every society, it seems there are always two groups battling for political and religious dominance. In Jesus' time there were the Sadducees and the Pharisees. The Sadducees and Pharisees were Jewish scholars and judges. The Jewish community looked to them as the final authorities on Jewish law and scripture, in addition to Moses' law. The Pharisees diligently followed an elaborate code of laws handed down from rabbi to rabbi in order to be as righteous as humanly possible. The Pharisees believed in resurrection and were waiting for the Messiah to return and usher in a new age. The Sadducees, on the other hand, did not believe in resurrection, and while strict in their interpretation of Hebrew scripture, were far more focused on political power and wealth than their adversaries. The only thing the Pharisees and Sadducees hated more than each other, besides the Romans, was Jesus. The Pharisees and Sadducees viewed Jesus' teachings as blasphemous, mainly because his teachings often seemed to contradict their interpretation of the laws, which could confuse the populace, and also brought their authority into question. So they would create tests for Jesus to expose him as the fraud they believed him to be. And in doing so they would then be free to stone him to death. Jesus would often have dinner with outcasts and criminals, which they viewed as at the very least offensive, if not sinful.
Why do you eat with sinners?
Jesus replied that it was not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. Foiled by his answer, they were forced to retreat and devise a new plan. It was apparent they'd have to be a bit more cunning to expose this charlatan.
Hey, Nicodemus! Let's go!
Shortly after this, on the Sabbath, Jesus was approached by a man with a crippled hand, hoping to be healed.
Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?
Jesus replied, "If one of your sheep fell in a pit on the Sabbath, wouldn't you pull it out? And isn't a man more valuable than a sheep?"
Yes, but...
This impostor Jesus was indeed a sly one. He had a way of making his words and actions seem valid, even true.
I'm healed!
But he couldn't possibly be the real thing. There had to be something wrong with him. It was just a matter of figuring out what it was. The Sadducees decided to pull out all the stops, using their vast knowledge and powerful intellect. They attempted to overwhelm Jesus with an overly complex scenario involving the resurrection, which the Sadducees did not believe in.
So, by Moses' law, the brother of the deceased has to marry and care for his widow. But if that brother dies without offspring, then the next brother in line has to marry his re-widowed widow, and so on and so forth. And for the sake of hypothesis, let's say that this happens 7 times. And then the last brother dies, again without offspring, immediately followed by the widow also dying. Which leads us to the question, at the resurrection, whose wife will she be?
The Sadducees were confident that Jesus couldn't possibly answer such a knowledgeable and well-crafted question, a question that had taken them weeks to come up with. However, to their complete shock, Jesus admonished them for their lack of knowledge in Scripture and the power of God, stating that in terms of the resurrection, there was no such thing as marriage, and that death itself is irrelevant, as all are living in the eyes of God. Needless to say, none of the Sadducees dared question Jesus ever again, at least not publicly. The Pharisees, on the other hand, were far more persistent. At tax time, they cornered Jesus again.
Is it lawful to pay these Roman taxes, or not?
Now they had him, for there was no safe answer to this question. If he came out against taxes, he would be deemed an enemy of Rome. But if he came out in favor of taxes, he would alienate himself from the Jewish people. But then Jesus asked them, what picture was on the coins they used to pay their taxes?
It's Caesar's face on the coin?
Jesus suggested they give Caesar what is Caesar's, and give God what is God's. Not only had Jesus successfully answered their impossible question, he had somehow made them feel guilty for asking it. The Pharisees were beginning to see why some people were calling him the Messiah. He was certainly the most convincing hoax they'd ever encountered. It was obvious now that they'd have to take far more extreme measures to deal with Jesus.
Nicodemus, you coming?
They certainly couldn't let Jesus continue his ministry. If too many people started to listen to him, it would destroy everything they had built, everything they believed in.
Rabbi, I have some questions.
Pay attention up there.
At the Feast of the Tabernacles, the Pharisees and Sadducees met to plan a final trap for Jesus. Jesus was preaching by the temple courts, even though he had been warned that the Pharisees were looking for a way to kill him. A group of temple guards were sent to arrest Jesus. But upon hearing Jesus' words, some of the people said, "Surely this man is the prophet." Others said, "He is the Messiah."
Why did you not bring Jesus in?
But no one has ever spoken the way this man does.
That is exactly why we need to kill him! For the sake of Israel!
They knew they had to stop Jesus soon, or things would spiral out of control. Jesus had evaded them at every turn. What could they possibly do to demonize a man that to the untrained eye seemed deeply compassionate and totally blameless? Unless they used the nuclear option. The Romans.
What would you have me do with this man? Crucify him!
Tell people not to pay taxes!
He says the king of the Jews! Blasphemer!
Yeah, that thing about taxes!
Great idea! Wait, who is this?
They had succeeded. Jesus of Nazareth had been silenced. Though it was unclear why Jesus, who had so brazenly questioned their laws and beliefs, would in the end give himself up so easily. But it was of no matter. That was the last they'd be hearing of him.